Namaste and good evening, everyone. Namaste, Narad.
You're silent.
Namaste, Sraddhalu.
Namaste. Greetings to everyone and a warm welcome on this eve of the special Darshan of November 24th.
Narad, Namaste. I think he's
He's
muted.
here and silent.
Okay.
You have to unmute. Can you unmute? Okay. There should be a. No, we can. Anyway.
As this evening, it's a very special evening before Darshan Day. Sraddhalu will give us more of the importance of this Darshan on the 24th of November. And we will be taking one question that we received. What is the significance of the Darshan on November 24th? I have read many confusing accounts. Some say that Sri Aurobindo managed to reach the overmind, and others say that Sri Krishna descended into Sri Aurobindo. I have also been told that November 24th, 1926, is the important passage in the life.
Oh.
Because it marks the culmination of a long movement of successive ascents of consciousness into the overmind consciousness, which descended into his being. In his outer life, it marks his total withdrawal from even the semi-public life he was leading. The realization that established itself at this juncture was of the delight consciousness of Lord Krishna.
Yes. This is unfortunately, there's a lot of confusion around this question. And recently, when this question came up, the cause of the confusion was rooted deep enough that I was urged to write a somewhat detailed response when I read such a question. And I thought this would be a theme worthwhile sharing and building upon because of the importance that it has for all of us, for humanity, as well as a stage in the formation of Sri Aurobindo's ashram and the development of his integral yoga. First of all, we notice a lot of literature or statements describing the observation of this date in various centers around the world. All of them concentrate on an image of Sri Krishna. They will say, oh, it is Krishna's descent, and so it is as if Krishna's day that is being celebrated. You're forgetting that it is Sri Aurobindo's realization, but there is with it a lot of confusion which comes with this vocabulary of association with what Sri Krishna represents. And so the idea that it was the day when the delight of consciousness of Krishna was established in Sri Aurobindo, as if that's all that would matter, or that's all that Krishna represents, or that's all that this day would represent. Or even the worst part, which is for me the most painful when I find this stated, even inadvertently, unintentionally, that what happened on 24th November was the culmination of a series of stages of Sri Aurobindo's evolution and successive ascents of consciousness. He finally reached the overmental consciousness. And then obviously after that, he had to reach or struggle to reach the supramental consciousness, which, as some of these malintentioned people have promoted, he never reached. At least that's what they want you to believe. And it is on this basis of this complete false representation, complete misrepresentation of Sri Aurobindo and his life and his yoga and his teaching that there was this big problem around the book that was published in the name of the ashram by somebody who claimed himself to be the founder of the ashram's archives when he was not. He was merely a little irritant troublemaker in the archives who was kept there at great personal distress by Jayantilal Parekh, who was the actual founder of the ashram archives. And so this is a little bit of a painful side to the story. Unfortunately, because of those ideas being seeded in the community, many have got these ideas somewhat rooted in their minds, which leads to much of this confusion. So I'd like to first go in depth on what we need to correct in our understanding, and then look at what the 24th of November represents, both in the mother's description, in Sri Aurobindo's words, as well as the events that took place on that day and before or after. First of all, in the integral yoga itself, we have to understand that the yoga has two directions of evolution. One is an evolution which is an ascent of consciousness. In this, we find something common with all systems of yoga, even with certain religious and philosophical traditions, which have the idea that consciousness can ascend and grow. But there is a second complementing aspect, which is that each stage of consciousness reached can then be brought down, not merely as an influence occasionally settling on the body, but as an active power, not merely as an active power, but as the dominant power that seizes the mind, life, and body. And not only as a power that seizes, dominates, but that invades, takes over, and from within changes and transforms the working of your consciousness. And when we speak of transforming or even changing your consciousness, it's not just a question of the mind, which certainly would be far easier to do. But in the context of the integral yoga, this same process will go all the way into the vital body and the life energies, and then all the way into the physical consciousness, and eventually even into the physical body and its tissue. And so there are two very distinct movements, one of ascent, one of descent. The descending movement itself can go through various degrees of descent, and each of these degrees of descent can be marked with not just an influence, but an overwhelming change and even a transformation of various gradations. So it is around these distinctions of ideas that most of the confusion people have rests. You must also recognize Sri Aurobindo himself never wrote from mere theory. What he wrote had so many new elements, so much that didn't exist before, but with such precision and detail, giving you nuances of how things work and where they don't. And he could not have done that if it was merely theoretical, because there was nobody before him who had documented these things. And even if you say he had intuited these things, that kind of nuanced detail, and then the references to his own experiences of those things, would not be possible if he did not have already the experience. So here is the most troublesome point. And just a few hours ago, I was speaking with someone and I said that people have a wrong idea that Sri Aurobindo was still trying to reach the supermind in 1926 and after. I said he had already reached the supermind in 1914. And this person said, "Oh, is it so? And how can we know that he reached it?" It was innocent, but it was also disappointing that this is still a question of doubt among disciples of Sri Aurobindo himself. So let's step back a little to recognize Sri Aurobindo's own journey, which in earnest of sustained immersion in yoga could be said to have begun from the time he entered jail, where in isolation from the work he was doing for India's freedom, he was brought there, as Sri Krishna told him, for the sadhana, so that he could dedicate himself wholly. And there already a certain process of intensification of yogic force had begun, where his physical body itself was undergoing a change. He notes how many of the colleagues in jail noted his hair had become shiny, oiled, as if. And they said, "Are you getting a special sanction of oil in jail?" He said, "No." "So how is it shining?" they asked. He said, "It's because of the nature of the force of yoga working in his biology, physical body, that there is a certain arrangement of working of force in the cells that makes the body able to produce its own oil as it needs to keep the hair healthy." Now this is, let's say, 1908, 9. That period, while in the jail, he has a series of experiences of the ascending gradations of consciousness and the corresponding worlds experiences. From there, after his release, he speaks already from a poise which is immersed in the divine consciousness, and you can see that in the Uttarpada speech, where he foresees the future and the work to unfold the inevitability of the rise of India and the Sanatana Dharma and so on. Subsequently, as he is still working in the political field, he gets the command. And the command, the Adesh, which is straight from the divine, is go to Chandernagore and from there go to Pondicherry. And he says, "I didn't question, I just went straight as commanded." The purpose of that was for him to be brought to the space of his tapasya, which was in Pondicherry. What follows then we see in the records of Sri Aurobindo's own diary notes, which he has called the Record of Yoga. And there we find Sri Aurobindo describing various stages of his own journey, the details of his practice, and it is one of the most extraordinary spiritual documents in human history. Nowhere we have a yogi of such high attainment actively describing in great detail steps of his evolution, but also struggles that he has to make in his growth, difficulties in stabilizing certain states of experience before he can move to the next, and then put in the context of the integral yoga, which is so comprehensive that it aims at transformation of the mind, life and body from the highest consciousness. You have no such thing ever even possible for most human beings. And all this you find in the Record of Yoga. Within a few years, we find the content reaches gradations that are so high that we don't know, we can't really put in human terms what he is experiencing, except for using vocabularies that he has used. So, he has reached a poise of living in a consciousness of the three sites, past, present, future, the three times are simultaneous in a totality of vision. He is able to extend his consciousness across space to influence events on a large scale in earth affairs. Now, none of these would in itself point to the supermind, but the specific descriptions of the states of consciousness and the technical terms he uses, vijnanam, very specifically supermind, all indicate the extent to which he had already stabilized his access to the supramental consciousness, from where there are a few oscillations as he's working to develop or integrate its working in him. 1914 is the capital year. This is the year in which we find all of those stages of oscillation have stabilized. He has stabilized in the level of the supermind consciousness. And it is at that point the mother arrives. The suggestion is made by her then husband to start a journal. Sri Aurobindo decides to start this journal, the Arya, and starts writing eventually what became 6 books at the same time. But in the very first of his writings, he is telling you of the supramental consciousness, what is necessary to ascend to it, and the work that needs to be done. He is relating to the Vedic texts and drawing from there the parallels describing how the Vedic rishis had accessed the supramental consciousness and so on. In later correspondences, he clarifies the difference between his work and theirs. Some of the Vedic rishis, at least, had reached the supramental consciousness. Some of them had brought it down individually, just within themselves, all the way into the mind. Even, it seems, some of them had a mentalized or a supramentalized mind. But it was not brought down into the physical. And whatever was achieved even within them was at an individual level, not for humanity. Now here are two very important distinctions. First, Sri Aurobindo himself, everything he did was intended for humanity. And so of this he said, if it had been just for his realization or the mother's transformation, not just realization, transformation, physical transformation by the supramental consciousness. If it was just for them individually, he said it would have been done long ago. And in fact, I'll make some references as we go along. Even by 1920, some of these things had been within their own physical consciousness quite exceptionally established. And by 1926, it had been stabilized almost completely. But he said because it is for humanity, that he had to connect to the collective consciousness of humanity. As a consequence, take on the burden of its inertia, resistance, and obstinacy, reflecting on him, not his own, and even transform that or bring light into that, while making his ascension and followed by descent of each thing that he ascended to. This is very important to understand. So by 1914, he had already reached the supramental consciousness. What happens subsequently is rather the process of the descent and integration from above, where that higher consciousness now begins not only to be an influence, but becomes an overwhelming influence, becomes an active dynamis originating the movements of the mind, life, body, eventually suffusing it with its substance and transforming it. And this is the process going on from 1914 onwards. In 1921, he observes, 1920 and 21. 1920, when he was sitting with the mother and they were working to free India, he made an observation that that particular action was initiated from the overmental consciousness. He was already living in the overmental consciousness. So what is this thing about 1926 being him reaching the overmental? You see, that's a completely wrong idea. He had already reached the overmental well before 1913 and 1914, 1912 even, you have descriptions in the record of yoga. But 1920, he's working from the overmental consciousness on world affairs. And stable in overmental for action, he has obviously sustained access to the supramental. But there's an integration taking place, which is the downward movement of the yoga that brings it down into his mind, life and body. This you will find in descriptions of Sri Aurobindo seen by people who met him during that period. The body itself had this extraordinary luminosity and power, which were the result of that action taking place in the body. Then we have a text from the mother where she explains how this work had taken a certain direction where they were bringing down the entire domain of the overmental gods and linking to the earth and to certain human vessels around. This was a work that the mother had been doing, obviously with Sri Aurobindo's sanction. And she said that the work was nearly complete. That's when she saw Sri Krishna preparing or hovering over Sri Aurobindo. And at one point, she saw him joining completely with Sri Aurobindo's physical body. We will read the text shortly, but I want to first put the context. And that was when, 24th of November, that 1926, Sri Aurobindo announced that he would retire. Hereafter, the mother would take charge of the ashram and the sadhana. And he would be working through her. There's a very interesting handover that he does, where as they're he's giving the darshan, he has the mother sitting next to him, and it's as if through her that he transmits the force and the blessing. And then he withdraws from active engagement. So again, what we find people speaking of 24th November as the day when Sri Aurobindo withdrew from public, that's highlighted. And again, to me, this seems to be completely wrong. Yes, of course, he also withdrew, but what did he do else which was more important? He established formally the Sri Aurobindo Ashram. It's the day of the birth of the Sri Aurobindo Ashram as a formal institution. So did he withdraw, or did he assert his work on earth in a form which was so distinct? And which would you call more important? The withdrawal was only at a superficial level, so as not to allow those external interactions to interfere with his entire one-pointed focus on the supramental consciousness in its descent and establishment on earth in the physical consciousness. Now, again, going back to the context, he has reached this overmental and supramental. He's been living there, working from there, but he's bringing down these levels through the mind, through the vital, through the subtle physical layer, which we have to deal very separate from the physical. And in 1926, 24th November, the overmental has been infused into the gross physical body. This is the work achieved. It had already reached the subtle physical before, the vital before, the mental before, well before. And now it's brought into the gross physical. And the supermind is not far behind. That has already been infused into the mind and into the vital to various degrees. But remember, the work made more difficult because they are connecting themselves to the whole of humanity, so that everything done in them gets imprinted in the collective consciousness. This distinction is critical, which is why it took time, which is why it had so many difficulties and even sometimes setbacks. In 1932, there is a letter of Sri Aurobindo where he says that what came down subsequently, 1927-28, in the formation that the mother was building through the connection of the gods with the people around Sri Aurobindo, what came down was partial and it had a specific mixture which would be harmful to the work in the long run, and therefore the decision to set aside that particular function, we will read about this, and then for him to bring directly the supermind bypassing the world of the gods and the overmental. Now again, this means he has full access and stability there. This thing being brought down, it's only a question of that thing now being brought down into the physical. It's already brought down into the mind and the vital to various degrees. So in himself, but also infusing into others. So 1932, he's actually saying, let's hope this happens in the earlier part of the decade rather than the later part. It is that imminent that it should be established now in the physical consciousness. And at the point when it starts happening, which was 1938, 37, 38, and the stabilization of the supramental consciousness in its physical vibrational poise in Sri Aurobindo's and the mother's body had reached such a degree that, and I've heard this in interviews from people who lived at that time, they said you could feel in the air the delight and the imminence of the new consciousness. It was so powerful, so tangible physically. And that's when the Second World War started. And the mother's observation that it was started by the hostile forces because they could not actively prevent Sri Aurobindo directly through attack or other means. But by starting that and threatening the world's future on a political, military level of survival, forcing him to dedicate energy to intervention in the world situation, and thereby creating a delay here. But they could only delay. But then what happened? With that came the influx of refugees to the ashram. And that brought the huge dilution which prevented that sustained concentration that had been built up. As a consequence, there was a further dilution and delay in the work, which required Sri Aurobindo to leave the body and for the mother and Sri Aurobindo to work across from the higher and lower domains to form the bridge through which the supramental could be brought down directly into the world. This the mother completed in 1956 in the physical consciousness of humanity and the universe. This was brought in as an active evolutionary force. Again, in her own body, what she was doing with the cells could have been completed long ago. The question really was of imprinting in the world in human consciousness. So I'm going to leave that aside, but understand that what took place in 1926 was not that Sri Aurobindo reached the overmental, rather that he had already done, perhaps 12, 14, 16 years earlier. He had brought it down all the way to the physical body consciousness and the overmental being. The Godhead is the term Sri Aurobindo uses. The being of that cosmic consciousness of the overmental, the presiding being, the presiding deity, which is Sri Krishna, that consciousness came and joined in him physically. Now again, the full import of this we will explore shortly. The supramental, which had already been reached, again, as I said, nearly a dozen years ago, was brought down and imminent. And the rest was only now a question of how you could complete this last step in the most rapid way that it could impact the collective consciousness of humanity. This was the only problem left. Sri Aurobindo also did not retire. Rather, he founded his ashram. He founded his work in an officially institutionalized framework. As a result, we have to really turn our understanding of what this day represents. It is rather a day of victory, of something established by which the certainty of the supramentalization of the physical was there inevitably. Because obviously before that can happen, the overmental had to be established in the physical. And once that was, then the rest was inevitable. So this is broadly the background I want to set for our understanding and the correction. There are others who have also, because of the name Sri Krishna or Krishna's consciousness, there are people who have asked, did Sri Aurobindo reach the Krishna consciousness that is spoken of by ISKCON? Did he reach the same consciousness that Krishna was already living in during the time of the Mahabharata? So what was it new? If he has just reached that level, he has just become equivalent to what Krishna was carrying. And then did eventually Sri Aurobindo finally rise to the supramental consciousness? So to all these questions, the answer is very simple. No, it's not that at all. The Krishna consciousness spoken of by ISKCON is just a general idea of the consciousness of the divine as the highest personality of the divine that the human mind can conceive. Here we are speaking of something fundamentally different, and it is the consciousness of the overmental as a personified cosmic being, now fused into the physical body of Sri Aurobindo. This was not the state in which the historical Sri Krishna lived. The historical Sri Krishna was an emanation of that, as are all prior avatars, technically speaking. As an emanation, it does not mean he lived in that absolute consciousness of which is his origin. It means he embodied something of that to the extent needed, to the extent possible in humanity during that period. What Sri Aurobindo achieved, what Sri Aurobindo attained was substantially, dramatically greater. It was something which had not been done before. This is very important to understand. In the physical body consciousness, that cosmic being which has put out incarnations before was fully embodied. This has never been done in a human body. And as far as supermind, he did not have to ascend eventually. He was bringing it down to establish it. And it was not a period of retirement. It was a period of his work taking on an active, established, formal framework of the Sri Aurobindo ashram. His retirement was only from external, superficial engagement with people. From that point on, he was in a state of continuous focus, and as he wrote to Nirodbaran, in a more joking way as one would to a child. He said, I've caught the supermind by the supramental by the tail, like a big whale's tail, and I'm pulling it down to fix it into the physical. So these distinctions are so important that I would suggest for all of you to review your understanding and to really make a correction here. We're going to read from what the mother has to say about this. What happened on that day? So the mother is speaking. This is from the agenda, August 2nd, 1961, and I put the links in the description box. She was speaking of how the various gods relate to the divine. Most of them are not really conscious of the oneness of the divine. So Satprem asks, yes, but aren't the gods conscious of the divine? And mother says, listen, my child, they are conscious of their own divinity and of that above all. They are connected with the divine, yes. But I know from experience that they haven't the faintest notion of what surrender is. So I'm skipping a little bit the example of Durga. We just read it recently, perhaps. And then this is the part where she's describing her relationship with these gods. I knew how it was with Durga because I remember the days when Sri Aurobindo was here and I used to go downstairs to give meditations to the people assembled in the hall, that place which is the meditation hall. There's a ledge above the pillars there where all the gods used to sit. Shiva, Krishna, Lakshmi, the Trimurti, all of them. The little ones, the big ones, they all used to come regularly, every day, to attend these meditations. It was a lovely sight. But they didn't have this kind of adoration for the Supreme. They had no use for that concept. Each one, in his own mode of being, was fully aware of his own eternal divinity. And each one knew as well as he could represent all the others. And each one knew as well that he could represent all the others. And such was the basis of popular worship. And they knew it. They felt they were a kind of community, but they had none of those qualities that the psychic life gives. No deep love, no deep sympathy, no sense of union. They had only the sense of their own divinity. They had certain very particular movements, but not this adoration for the Supreme, nor the feeling of being instruments. They felt they were representing the Supreme. It's a very fine nuance to be an instrument or to represent. You see, when you represent, you are the authority. You take on the authority of the one who you represent, isn't it? But you're not the one who you represent. So in a sense, one could say even that taking on of authority is not true. It's an exaggeration of their actual role, isn't it? So, nor the feeling of being instruments. They felt they were representing the Supreme. And so each one was perfectly satisfied with his particular representation. Then she says, except for Krishna. Now, remember, she's talking of Krishna like this, one of the deities who's coming, one of the gods. In 1926, I had begun a sort of over-mental creation. That is, I had brought the overmind down into matter. Now, Mother is speaking of bringing down overmind in 1926 into matter. You can't do that if you have not already reached it. Isn't it? It's the most obvious thing. She is able to freely operate in the overmental world. And frankly, again, to put this in very blunt human terms, it's not such a big deal. There have been many yogis who have reached the overmental consciousness, even in recent times. So for you to think that Sri Aurobindo reached the overmental is the most foolish thing one could do. So Mother is saying this. I had begun a sort of overmental creation. I had brought down the overmind into matter here on earth. So she has the mastery, not only to be able to go there, but to actually take that substance and bring it down. She is wielding it as a master of the overmental domain. Sri Aurobindo obviously has the same. Okay, so it's not like they reached the overmind. They were actually bringing it down and manifesting, bringing it into the physical. So here on earth, Miracles and all kinds of things were beginning to happen. I asked all these gods to incarnate, to identify themselves with a body. Some of them absolutely refused. Well, with my very own eyes, I saw Krishna, who had always been in rapport with Sri Aurobindo, consent to come down into his body. Now, you will remember at that time when the mother was making these connections, links from the gods to individuals in the ashram, there was the famous soup ceremony I have mentioned before, where, and I've heard this on a description from one of the sadhaks who was present, this was as soon as you enter the ashram today, they have closed doors, which mother wanted always to be open, but they have closed them now. And inside there is what is called the reception. That place was the soup ceremony room. And still very beautiful presence. There, all the disciples would be assembled. They were a little over 20, I think less than 30 or somewhere in that range. The soup which had just been prepared would be brought. It was late evening. Mother would hold her hands above the soup and bring down the overmental into this, the full substantiality of the overmental into the soup. And she would hold her hands like this, go into deep trance, and she had a partial veil, and the one who was describing said it was such a deep mystical experience. You could feel the power flowing, and then she would take a bowl of the water, of the soup, sip it herself. Obviously, at that point, she was infusing into it that particular deity, God, with whom she could identify, bring down, and connect physically. Imagine her mastery. And then this would be given to the disciple who comes, and he would drink. Again, another scoop in the bowl. She would concentrate to bring down the next god corresponding to the person who was in front of her, take a sip herself, and then he would drink. And so it was in this way, I think the bowl would be given. So each one had a different bowl it was given, but she would infuse, link, and give to each one the particular power that had chosen as him as an instrument. And people had extraordinary experiences, I've mentioned before. That's not important. So I continue from mother's description. Well, with my very own eyes, I saw Krishna, who had always been in rapport with Sri Aurobindo, consent to come down into his body. So this is, Sri Aurobindo didn't need to have this thing done through the mother's process with the soup. It was directly hovering near Sri Aurobindo. It was on November 24th, and it was the beginning of Mother. That's when Sri Aurobindo declared her the Mother. Yes, Supreme says, yes, in fact, I wanted to ask you what this realization of 1926 was. Mother says, it was this. Krishna consented to descend into Sri Aurobindo's body, to be fixed there. There is a great difference, you understand, between incarnating, being fixed in a body, and simply acting as an influence that comes and goes and moves about. So this is a very important difference. You can have an influence of one of these gods that comes, fills, lifts you, withdraws. But when it chooses to fix, it's no more an influence, it is incarnating and fusing materially, and stays now bound in the body. Literally as if that deity who had put out an incarnation at the time of the Mahabharata, which was a partial emanation of his consciousness, is now fully embodying himself in a human vessel that is capable of receiving. But as for purpose of participating in this work, it's not like he's taking over Sri Aurobindo. He is now identifying in order to participate in the work of the transformation that Sri Aurobindo is doing. So you have to again understand the relationship. It's not that Sri Aurobindo became Sri Krishna. Sri Krishna joined into Sri Aurobindo's physical consciousness in order to support and participate in this work of the transformation. You see, the difference is very important. It is not Sri Krishna that we are celebrating. It is Sri Aurobindo's victory and realization that we are celebrating, in which Sri Krishna now, as the head of the overmental Godhead, comes and joins to participate in this work of transformation. The gods are always moving about, and it's plain that we ourselves in our inner beings come and go and act in 100 or 1,000 places at once. So Mother puts it like this, because our consciousness is not really rooted even where we are. We are kind of wandering and so on. So she says, there is a difference between just coming occasionally and accepting to be permanently tied to a body, between a permanent influence and a permanent presence. So at that point, when you look at Sri Aurobindo, you will not say, oh, now he has become Krishna. You will say that deity, that is Sri Krishna, as the head of the overmental domain, is now fused within his body in participation of Sri Aurobindo's work. Obviously, there is Sri Krishna there also. But this is very different from that incarnation, which was an emanation of that presence, which it was not a full embodiment of the overmental Godhead in this way. Here, Sri Aurobindo is living in the fullness of that power. There, that person of Krishna of the Mahabharata manifested something of that light and force to various degrees according to the work done, and fulfilled the mission that was required in his incarnation. That's about it. That's all you can say. Here is a fully embodied presence of the overmental in a constant 24-hour state, in a permanent presence, and not just as an influence that comes and goes. The influence coming and going would have been true of the Mahabharata Krishna. Then Mother says, these things have to be experienced. So Prem asks, but in what sense did this realization mark a turning point in Sri Aurobindo's sadhana? You see, again, we have an idea, oh, Sri Aurobindo did achieve this. Mother, no. The phenomenon was important for the creation. For himself, he was rather indifferent to it. But I did tell him about it. Here's the interesting part. We're all saying, oh, Sri Aurobindo attained Krishna consciousness, which is not correct. Rather, Krishna manifested, incarnated, fused into his physical body. It's a very different thing. It's important for creation, for humanity, for world, for this universe. For Sri Aurobindo, he was rather indifferent to it. For the sadhana that he was doing, with or without that, it would not matter too much. Of course, that being there meant there was the conscious, intentional participation of Sri Krishna in this work. But it doesn't change the nature of the work. It doesn't change the nature of what Sri Aurobindo is doing and what he has to achieve. It perhaps makes it easier because of that participation. So there's an observation Sri Aurobindo makes. It is in the evening talks where he's asked, what are the requirements for the supermind to come into the physical quickly? And he says one of the requirements is that all the overmental gods would consent to work in the physical consciousness. That would hasten this process substantially, because they would be, so to say, precursors to that. And this is what the mother had been doing through that whole process. So I continue to read. It was at that time that he decided to stop dealing with people and retire to his room. It was this dealing with people that he withdrew from, but still continued in letter writing. And we have to understand why. Because the state of concentration in which he held the supermind and brought it down was such an extraordinary power, such an extraordinary intensity, that first of all, for human beings who were close to him, it would be unbearable to contain. And second, for him to expose himself would be to expose to the very contrary vibrations which would prevent this concentrated state. And therefore, this strategic retirement from superficial engagement. But he continues to write, he is interacting, and he has a few disciples who are very close, physically looking after him, the mother herself interfacing to protect and hold this intensity of build-up. The nature of that build-up is so extraordinary that people who did have glimpses of Sri Aurobindo, sometimes by accident, were totally overwhelmed. They were dazzled even by what they saw. And mother had specifically requested people, even if they had to go upstairs for some work, for some repair, if they were passing near Sri Aurobindo's room, they were told not to look inside. to look down or to look away and to avoid directly looking within for the reason. And Sri Aurobindo writes in response to one of the disciples who asks him, can you not just have another darshan because there's too much of a gap between the different dates? And so that's when the later April darshan was added. But Sri Aurobindo says, you don't realize that every time there is the darshan, my work is seriously hampered. So again, we would say, but he's going to give something to humanity. Isn't that great? How is it hampered? He explains it's because in order to make himself bearable to people, he has to reduce the intensity of the build-up and concentration of the supramental force on his body. He has to reduce it to a level that is sufficiently manageable, even for people who are in the ashram. And so that reduction of that intensity is delaying the work of bringing and fusing the supramental consciousness in his body and in the collective consciousness. But that is already on to that degree. Again, you must understand, it's not like he was chasing the supermind. He had already reached it. He's now fusing it into the physical consciousness and transforming the material tissue by its working. This is the work that is going on. For people who say, oh, mother did a yoga which is different. No, she was doing exactly the same thing later on. It was a continuation of what he had been doing before. So, it was at that time that he decided to stop dealing with people and retire to his room. So he called everyone together for one last meeting. Before then, he used to go out on the veranda every day to meet and talk with all who came to see him. This was the origin of the famous talks with Sri Aurobindo by A.B. Purani. Mother is about to say something severe, then reconsiders. So she's about to say how much they kind of did not recognize the value of what they had with him. Then she says, anyway, I was living in the inner rooms and seeing no one. Interestingly, Sri Aurobindo was meeting people. The mother was in the inner room, which was next to Sri Aurobindo's. And again, this is I heard from people who had seen her during that time, one of whom was attending on her also. She would always be in a veil. Because again, the intensity of the presence held in her body physically was so great that it would be too much. So even the veil was used as a way of limiting what was transmitted. I was living in the inner rooms and seeing no one. He was going out onto the veranda, seeing everyone, receiving people, speaking, discussing. I saw him only when he came back inside. After a while, I too began having meditations with people. I had begun a sort of over-mental creation to make each god descend into a being. There was an extraordinary upward curve. So this is what I described earlier as the soup ceremony. Well, I was in contact with these beings and I told Krishna, because I was always seeing him around Sri Aurobindo, this is all very fine, but what I want now is a creation on earth. You must incarnate. He said, yes. Then I saw him. I saw him with my own eyes, inner eyes of course, join himself to Sri Aurobindo. Then I went to Sri Aurobindo's room and told him, here is what I have seen. Yes, I know, he replied. Mother laughs. That's fine. I have decided to retire to my room and you will take charge of the people. You take charge. There were about 30 people at the time. You see, Mother puts it in a humorous way. But you notice also in this description that for Sri Aurobindo, it was not a big deal. He was working on something. This was something coming to help, participate. It gave the certainty of that next step, but it was just a step forward. Then he called everyone together for one last meeting. He sat down, had me sit next to him and said, I called you here to tell you that as of today, I am withdrawing for purposes of sadhana and Mother will now take charge of everyone. You should address yourselves to her. She will represent me and she will do all the work. And Mother says, he hadn't mentioned this to me. Mother bursts into laughter. Then she continues, these people had always been very intimate with Sri Aurobindo. So they asked, why? He replied, it will be explained to you. Mother says, I had no intention of explaining anything. And I left the room with him. But Datta began speaking. Datta is somebody, English woman, Dorothy. So mother says, she was an English woman who had left Europe with me. She stayed here until her death, a person who received inspirations. She had some kind of an opening. She said she felt Sri Aurobindo speaking through her, and she explained everything. That Krishna had incarnated and that Sri Aurobindo was now going to do an intensive sadhana for the descent of the supermind. That it meant Krishna's adherence to the supramental descent upon earth, and that as Sri Aurobindo would now be too occupied to deal with people, he had put me, the mother, in charge, and I would be doing all the work. So you see, again here this idea, Krishna's adherence to the supramental descent. He is choosing to participate in a work which Sri Aurobindo is doing. Okay, it's very important, this relationship. It is not that now Krishna is incarnated and replaced Sri Aurobindo. No, he has just joined to support Sri Aurobindo's work. But certainly it's significant because that is going to be of a great help. This was in 1926, the mother says. It was only, how can I put it, a participation from Krishna. Again, I'm highlighting this. Mother is saying this. It was only, how can I put it, a participation from Krishna. It made no difference for Sri Aurobindo personally. It was a formation from the past that accepted to participate in the present creation, nothing more. It was a descent of the Supreme from some time back, now consenting to participate in the new manifestation. So you understand, when people put out these posters with Krishna in the flute and November 24th, it's as if Sri Krishna is going to give you darshan and the whole focus shifts to Krishna. It's not at all that. Certainly Krishna choosing to participate is important, but it is still Sri Aurobindo and Sri Aurobindo's work and Sri Aurobindo's attainment of the overmental and establishing it in the physical, with or without the personality of Sri Krishna joining in. You understand the difference? Shiva, on the other hand, mother says, refused. No, he said, I will come only when you have finished your work. I will not come into the world as it is now, but I am going to help. He was standing in my room that day, so tall, mother is laughing, that his head touched the ceiling. He was bathed in his own special light, a play of red and gold, magnificent. So, mother asks him he says, I can give you anything. Oh, I think I'll read it. Just as he is when he manifests his supreme consciousness, a formidable being. So I stood up, and I too must have become quite tall because my head was resting on his shoulders, just slightly below his head. Then he told me, no, I am not tying myself to a body, but I will give you anything you want. The only thing I said, it was all done wordlessly of course, was, I want to be rid of the physical ego. Now again we have to understand physical ego is not what we call ego. Physical ego is the body substance. Its sense of separation from the rest of the things in the universe. And to be rid of the physical ego would be the body itself would no more feel separate from anything in the universe at the level of the tissue and cells. Not at a vital level, not at a mental level. It's a very different experience. So mother says, well, my child, laughing, she says, it happened. It was extraordinary. After a while, I went to find Sri Aurobindo and said, see what has happened. I have a funny sensation, mother laughs, of the cells no longer being clustered together. They are going to scatter. He looked at me, smiled and said, not yet. And the effect vanished. But Shiva had given me what I wanted. Not yet, Sri Aurobindo said. No, the time wasn't ripe. It was too early, much too early. And then remember, this is 1961, quite a way away from 1926. She said, I had it 2 years ago. That is the dissolution of the physical ego. But now there is something else. Things are different now. So this is the first text I wanted to read. We have a lot of comments of Sri Aurobindo in this direction also, where I just read one, which is the most commonly known one. He says, Krishna is not the supramental light. The descent of Krishna would mean the descent of the overmind Godhead, preparing, though not itself actually bringing the descent of supermind and Ananda. Krishna is the Anandamaya. He is as if the Lord of the overmental delight. He supports the evolution through the overmind, leading it towards his Ananda. That's it. Now, Krishna's joining with Sri Aurobindo's physical body is only the participation of that particular presiding deity of the overmental world to participate on a physical level in this effort of the transformation. That's all. So, Sri Aurobindo again refers to it was the descent of Krishna into the physical. That's it. So, you will see Sri Aurobindo himself does not give too much importance, except that it's a point of transition where it's necessary for him to withdraw from this superficial engagement where he's actually talking with people so freely. Concentrate on this work now of what was done with the overmental consciousness to be done with the supramental consciousness, which is not far away, which is already in the mind and vital. Just as the overmental was already there before and was only fused in the physical as the last step. The supermind is right here, but again, there's a whole larger context to the gradations of the supramental consciousness, which he has documented, and there are higher gradations. There is the most essential part of the supramental. He speaks of 3 gradations of the supermind, and in the overmental there are 3 gradations, and the highest of the overmind and the lowest of the pure supermind are practically indistinguishable from one and the other. So there's an interesting observation of his where he says that this difference can only be felt when this grade of consciousness meets the physical and tries to transform it. There, the slightly lower overmental part, which is the highest of the overmental, is able to take the physical up to a point but not overcome the last point of resistance. Whereas that grade just above begins that process of actually being able to overcome that fine last grade of resistance of matter. Now, all this you have to understand means Sri Aurobindo has already done this work up to this point. And it is that last grade of the transition which he is working upon. In terms of the transformation by the supramental consciousness, where the substance of mind becomes supramentalized, substance of vital is supramentalized, substance of subtle physical is supramentalized. This has already been done in him. And from here, the transition into the gross physical and its supramentalization and transformation into supramental physical substance. That's really where they are at. Of course, there are gradations and degrees within all those also. But all this is being done in them, imprinted in humanity, so that that imprint of everything they do will stay and make easy for us to attain to or realize those states. So, I'm coming again to another text. This is from December 22, 1962. Sadprem is writing his book, and about the ashram's bright period of 1926, he puts bright period in quotes, where Mother made an overmental creation and the gods were beginning to manifest. This is Sadprem's comment. Now, Mother's response after he reads out this passage. In the end, Sri Aurobindo told me it was an overmental creation, not the truth. Truth means supramental, capital T. These were his very words. Yes, it's an overmental creation, but that's not the truth we are seeking. It's not the truth, the highest truth, he said. I made no reply, Mother comments. Not a word. In half an hour, I had undone everything. I undid it all, really everything. Cut the connection between the gods and the people here. Demolished absolutely everything. Half an hour. 2 years of work undone in half an hour. Because you see, I knew it was so attractive for people. They were constantly seeing the most astonishing things, that the obvious temptation was to hang on to it and say, we will improve on it, which was impossible. So I sat down quietly for half an hour and I undid it all. Now you must understand, our perspective of Sri Aurobindo and the mother is so narrow. When mother is saying this, that these people are constantly seeing the most astonishing things, that's your human experience. For mother, those are the most ordinary things she has already been seeing and dealing with them for a few decades. She's now bringing down this thing to give people the access to these experiences. And they're just barely beginning. But they don't even know what they're seeing. They don't know how it's being done to them. They don't know what's happening to their consciousness. They're just like a scientist working on guinea pigs. They're just experiencing the benefit. She who has the full mastery of these domains all the way up and all those experiences is doing the work of infusing in them, establishing all that in them. Perhaps eventually they would grow enough to be able to really understand what was being done, but they cannot at this point. And yet they're receiving all these experiences. I've shared before one of the persons we had interviewed who was one of those. Afterwards, when mother stopped it, he kind of lost his balance, or I would rather say he was never too smart to really understand what was happening. It was all her working. So in the interview that we had with him, he actually told us, I was becoming too powerful. I was becoming so powerful that mother got jealous of me. I was becoming more powerful than her. So mother got jealous of me and removed the whole power from me. What a joker. I'm sorry, I'm using a little casual language, but I think it deserves it. Because even to think that the mother thinks you have become too powerful, but she has greater power than you and can remove from you what she has put into you. How can you even imagine that you are becoming more powerful than her? But this shows you what happens when a greater power is brought into a lesser vessel. And the vessel itself has not been sufficiently purified and prepared. Obviously, the mother had the capacity to hold them and to work even to purify and prepare them. But it shows you what she was capable of doing from her own consciousness and the ranges where she was well established to infuse upon another and bring them to any degree of that development of evolution in a part of them. The rest may have not been so regenerate or prepared or ready. But she could work on it and make it all if they were open and to the extent they were open. So literally she was doing the sadhana in them, and then there's a point that she decides that it is to be undone. She undoes it. And this poor fellow now finds himself falling back into his petty humanity, but with the overwhelming remnant of the experiences he has had. And it of course goes to his little head. So I sat down quietly half an hour and I undid it all. And she says, we had to start over again with something else. She doesn't say what. But I said nothing. I told no one about it except Sri Aurobindo. At the time, I let no one know because they would have been completely discouraged. So she doesn't say anything, the soup ceremony is stopped and that whole process is ended. That's it. So this is another very revealing text, and another portion I'm going to read where she describes the whole thing. She's speaking of miracles, and this is March 9th, 1963. And now she says, it was the same thing when I made that over-mental formation. We were heading for miracles. One day, Sri Aurobindo told me I had brought down into Amrita a force of the creative Brahma. He was one of Mother's secretaries. It's the creative word. The word that realizes itself automatically. So Amrita was the vessel for that deity. And I don't know what happened, something, I can't recall what, that showed me it was working very well. I can't recall what that showed me. It was working very well. Then a sort of idea occurred to me. Why? We could try this power on mosquitoes. Let mosquitoes cease to exist. What would happen? We were pestered by mosquitoes at the time. Before doing it, the meditation was over. It would have been for the next time. I said to Sri Aurobindo, well, what if we tried with that force which responds? If we said, let mosquitoes cease to exist, we could at least get rid of them within a certain field of action, a certain field of influence, couldn't we? So he looked at me with a smile, kept silent, and after a moment turned to me and said, "You are in full overmind. This is not the truth we want to manifest." And mother says, "I told you the story. It was on that occasion." We could have done things of that sort. He told me, Sri Aurobindo, mother speaks with an ironic tone, "Oh, you can certainly perform miracles. People will be wonderstruck." And then she speaks of other things, other experiences of her life. But you see, and mother says we could have done all kinds of such things. When these powers of the overmental deities were manifest in human beings in this way, to this extent, not necessarily that they are conscious, it's the Vedic deities who are now incarnating in physical bodies, literally, and the powers that they could exercise, which are natural to the overmental, just being wielded. But all this to Sri Aurobindo and the mother were already natural. And they were now infusing it into these little, I will, sorry to use the phrase, human guinea pigs. So for us to have this wrong idea that, oh, Sri Aurobindo reached overmind, no, sir. He was master of this domain. She was master of this domain. They could just bring down the gods from those domains and join with the human beings who were perhaps receiving something exceptional. In Sri Aurobindo's own body, the overmental consciousness was largely settled. What happened here was Sri Krishna, as Godhead of the overmental, fuses into his body in a permanent part as a participant of this work of transformation. It is Sri Aurobindo's victory. You understand? Not Krishna's victory. And is a step in the supramentalization, towards the supramentalization. So I'm again going to skip to one more passage. Regarding the overmental and the distinction about the oneness, which she says, this is just what I am observing these days. To me, the overmental consciousness is a magnified consciousness, far lovelier, far loftier, far more powerful, far happier, far with lots of far mores to it. But I can tell you one thing, the gods don't have the sense of oneness. For instance, in their own way they quarrel among themselves, which shows they have no sense of oneness, no sense of all being one, of all being various expressions of the divine, the unique divine. So they are still on this side, but with magnified forms and powers beyond our comprehension. The power to change form at will, for example, or to be in many places at the same time. All sorts of things that poor human beings can only dream of having. The gods have it all. They live a divine life, but it's not supramental. The supermind is knowledge, pure knowledge. Yes, it is knowing what is to be known. There is no longer a play between oneself and things. It is truly the sign of the supermind. Truly, the sign of the supermind is oneness. Not a sum of a lot of different things, but on the contrary, a oneness at play with itself. There is nothing of the way gods relate to each other and the world, for they are still part of a realm of diversity, though free from ignorance. They don't have ignorance. They don't have what we human beings have here. They have no ignorance. They have no unconsciousness, but they have the sense of diversity and of separation. So I skip, and she speaks more about the difference, but this is the important part I wanted to read. The experience of the gods has never been more than a distraction for me, mother says. An amusement, a pleasant diversion. None of it seems essential or indispensable. You can treat yourself to the luxury of all these experiences and they increase your knowledge and your power, your this and your that, but it's not particularly important. The thing is altogether different. And now she says something, it will blow your mind. We can do without the gods. We can have access to the supermind without any of these experiences. They are not indispensable. But if you want to know and experience the universe, if you want to be identified with the Supreme in His expression, well, all this is part of His expression in varying degrees and with varying powers. It's all part of His experience. So why not treat yourself to that luxury? It's very interesting, but not indispensable. I think that once you are identified with the Supreme and He has chosen you to do a work on earth, then He quite naturally grants you all these things because it increases your power of action. That's all. That's all. And I skip again. Sri Aurobindo didn't put too much emphasis on the overmind. See, this is so important. A lot of people are stuck with this idea, oh, he had to first reach overmind, and this great overmind realization was not quite. Sri Aurobindo didn't put too much emphasis on the overmind. The one significant point is that the overmind has ruled the world through the different religions. And it is the dwelling place of all the gods. All the beings humans have made into gods in their religions. These beings exist in their own world, and some humans coming in touch with them have been overwhelmed by their powers and their superiority and have made gods and religions out of them. So now Mother tells this to Satprem, but it's better not to emphasize this in your book. As I've said, we can bypass that plane or even pass through it without knowing it. It interested me to read in the Vedas that if you don't ascend the way you are supposed to, if you try to bypass the gods, then unpleasant things happen to you and your way is blocked. Do you remember that? Mother says. That gives you an idea of what it is. It's like an intermediate zone, far superior to the earth, but still intermediate. Some have tried to cross it without stopping, and there they say you run into trouble. Personally, I'm sure, I can only speak of my own experience. There was always a sense of fraternity, as you can imagine. I knew them, the gods. I was on friendly terms with them, so there was no question of bypassing them or not. But I have a strong impression that that world is still a magnified version of our own and part of the old path. It has nothing to do with the supramental creation, which will bring to earth the sense of the supreme and the unique. Basically, it's part of the old path, a consequence of all that has happened, of the whole formation as we know it. So, again, it will help to put in context what happened on the 24th of November. And its consequence, which I want to highlight, is Sri Aurobindo's work took a new direction, and he used that occasion to withdraw for purpose of deepening the exclusive focus on materializing the supermind in the body consciousness in order to transform the physical consciousness itself. I think this is broadly what I wanted to share as regards the importance of this occasion. It is important because you find here the glory of Sri Aurobindo's achievement expressed. And it is Sri Aurobindo's victory. It's a victory day, but it is Sri Aurobindo's victory where the overmental consciousness and the Godhead of the overmind, who is a cosmic being, embodies, joins with Sri Aurobindo's body in order to participate in Sri Aurobindo's work. And so on a cosmic level, it has a huge impact. For Sri Aurobindo and his work, it was a good, useful help, but it didn't depend on it. And you can see the scale and values are so different from ours. Nevertheless, it has a cosmic impact. And so the anniversary that we will observe on 24th November would be important for this reason, because of what Sri Aurobindo established and the effect it has had in the cosmos, which set the base for the certainty of what had to follow and the supramentalization of the physical consciousness. I'm going to take a look at the chat box very quickly for any questions which have been So here we have somebody's comment. Someone called Digital Capitalist says, I was speaking about the advent of Satya Sai Baba. He was speaking about the advent of Satya Sai Baba. And Rumpel says, Sai Baba is not connected to Sri Aurobindo. And Digital Capitalist says, Aurobindo predicted Satya Sai's advent. No, this is wrong. This is a wrong understanding. It has been spread by people perhaps who are disciples of Satya Sai Baba, who have twisted the whole story. I don't even like to say the twist because then it goes into people's minds as a story. The way they twisted the story was they said, Sri Aurobindo declared that God has incarnated on earth now, so I'm retiring, my work is over. And that God was Satya Sai Baba. Well, this is not true at all. And is completely made up. There's no such thing, no basis to it. It's completely false. So please consciously erase this idea. Sri Aurobindo had no connection with Satya Sai Baba. Satya Sai Baba had no connection with Sri Aurobindo at all. They were completely different in what they represent, in what they teach, and the work they had. What Sai Baba had to do, I will not comment upon. He did have goodwill for Sri Aurobindo and a deep respect. And there was one particular disciple from the ashram who had gone to see him. And Sai Baba told him very simply, why do you come to the reflected light when you have the sun? So, and sent him back to Sri Aurobindo, or to the ashram. I don't know which year it was, but certainly it was not, maybe it was not even Sri Aurobindo was not in the body at the time. But so he did have a respect, but certainly this event and this story this event has no connection with his birthday, and this story is totally made up by somebody. So please erase that idea completely. There's no such thing. Piyush says, so the supramental has already been brought down to the physical plane. So from 1956, when the mother brought down the supramental consciousness, and that's why she calls it the supramental manifestation, that power is flowing into the physical world, in the physical universe, as an active force in evolution. Certainly as a supramental power, your mind and supermind are not able to meet because your mind is still too coarse, too crude, too finite, too insensitive, too dull and dark to even feel the supermind directly. But something of your psychic consciousness, when it is sufficiently active and clear, can sense the presence of the supermind and at least recognize its presence. Yet it cannot directly engage with it because that is a power of the infinite. Until your own consciousness becomes infinite, you cannot directly receive the supramental action in you. There's a letter of Sri Aurobindo, which I am paraphrasing, where he says that for you to be able to directly receive the action of the supermind, your entire mind should have opened to the inner universal mind. Your vital should have opened to the inner universal vital. Your physical should have opened to the inner universal physical. Your psychic being should be entirely in front, in charge of the whole personality. And then in this combined opening, which is now universalized on all these levels, you would be able to relate to the supermind directly and receive its action in you. I've paraphrased, but this is broadly the basic requirement to be able to enter that stage of the yoga. Before that, everything we are doing is perhaps steps towards this, isn't it? So when you think in these terms, you realize how far it is we are, even to feel direct contact of the supermind. And yet the supermind is not far because indirectly it is working all the time. And the closest point that we are able to access of it is the ray of the supermind, which is the finite extension, which we call intuition. A ray of intuition, a flash of intuition you may receive in the higher gradations of your mind or even within your functioning mind. That flash momentarily that you felt is like a ray reflecting inside your mind of the supermind, a ray of the supermind. But the ray is a finite tip. The supermind, and to know it, your consciousness must be familiar with infinity, must be able to live in infinity, must be able to relate from infinity to infinity. Then you will be able to receive something of the touch of the supermind or feel it. And it must be fully psychicized to be able to distinguish that grade that is the supermind. Or at least must be under dominant psychic influence to glimpse it from far, even in passing. At that moment, even. Just at that moment. Then you can have a glimpse. And then it may pass because you don't stay in that state for too long. So I'm showing you how close it is, and at the same time how far it is, because we have not yet prepared ourselves to be able to receive its action. It is close, intimately close. If it was not present, your ability of intelligence to operate would not be possible. You see, in the Kena Upanishad, there is this question, who leads the mind to its goal? I'm going to put it in a more accessible term when I say, when you're looking for an answer to a question, how do you know in which direction to look? How do you know when you're close to finding the answer? And when you found the answer, how do you know it is the answer? Because something inside you already knew. It knew where the answer was, so you could go in that direction. It knew how close you are because it knows the answer. And when you reach it, it knows it has reached it because it already knew it. This is taking place at a layer which is behind your surface consciousness, in a deeper, not even intuitive, but from the intuitive leaning back to something wider which opens to the supermind. If this was not present, you would not be able to do this in a basic functioning of intelligence. So in that sense, if not for the presence of supermind, your intelligence wouldn't function. It's that close. And yet it's so far that there's nothing in you currently able to receive or even recognize it because it's so different. You see how to understand this relationship. It's like saying you're breathing the air. It is so intimately close to you, you couldn't live without breathing the air. And yet, can you grasp it? And if you think you can grasp it or feel it when you move like this, yes, I can feel a little bit of air. What you're feeling is a ripple here. But the air you're speaking of is this massive, cosmic, whole oneness, of which you're feeling this little ripple and saying, this is certainly it. No, it's not. That is it. But to be able to reach this, to be able to experience this, you must have in some part of you at least open to this wideness and infinity. And then from here you can embrace, enter in deepening relationship with that and receive its embrace. In the beginning, it is vast, you're too small. Its embrace you feel. In time, as it shapes you and you open out and learn to grow to or meet its vastness more and more, it fills you to widen you more and more, until it makes you as a vessel as wide as it is, or something approaching it. Then that's when you can begin to have some real, meaningful, direct relationship with it. In the part in you which is most plastic and wide, which is generally some part of the intuitivized mind at first. And then from there, bit by bit, it comes down, supramentalizing your mind, vital, physical, all the way. And each of these layers has to become like this. So you understand the scope of the work and stages of the work still pending. But this is what Sri Aurobindo had already achieved by 1926 and the mother. So I continue with some of the questions. Minal asks, do the gods and goddesses exist in the forms that we see in the pictures? It was an interesting question put to Anandamayi Ma. She used to live, mother confirmed that she met the mother, and mother confirmed that she lived in the Satchidananda consciousness. So in one of the conversations, she says that she sees the gods just like that, as she sees anybody. And then someone asks, what do they look like? She says, just like that, just like they draw in those pictures. And it's a fact that when you go into those domains of the higher worlds, you do meet them in forms of this kind. So for example, you must understand a deity of the kinds we have spoken of, which are overmental beings, they are cosmic beings, they are aspects of the divine. You don't have to go all the way to the overmind to meet them, because from there they reflect on each plane with an equivalent reduced form. And so you can meet them on many of these planes, including typically the vital plane. So in the vital planes, and I'm saying many planes, particularly in the higher ranges of the vital planes, you will see them in the forms that are typically drawn in the paintings or temple architectures and the descriptions you have traditionally of, for example, Vishnu having 4 arms and Mahalakshmi on the lotus and so on. Now you will see these forms, let's say in the vital worlds. You will meet Shiva in the vital worlds. People sometimes going out of the body, in out-of-body experiences, have these experiences. The mistake would be to stop and say, I've met that. Yes, you did meet that. In its a representation or projection or emanation that belongs to this vital world. You did not meet the Shiva of the cosmic and the overmental working. Not as the Vedic deity, or its reduction to the Puranic deity, perhaps you could say. So even to put it in these terms, the Vedic deities are described in their poise in the supramental and overmental, let's say, in between that world. And the subsequent Upanishadic descriptions correspond to something which is from the overmental to the higher mind range, maybe including the intuitive. And then subsequently in the Puranas, what you have is the same deities in there working from the mental through the vital domains and occasionally materializing physically. So what you have met is certainly matching the description. It has something of that quality perhaps, and sometimes that can be overwhelming in itself. Remember, we are so small, even a drop of that ocean is overwhelming. But to be able to truly say you have met that Shiva of the Vedic experience or the overmental experience, you would have to go to something approaching the overmental. It does not mean you have to enter the full overmental. You should be close enough that you should be able to experience something of that overwhelming infinity. And then a part of that consciousness could as if lean down and reveal itself to you. And then again, you might have a vision in that form. The same form, but with the big difference that as you gaze on this form, you would be blown apart into this cosmic experience of that form. Literally, you cannot contain it. Your consciousness is blown apart in this vision. And if you're not used to this state, it's like you blanked out, you zoned out. You don't know anymore who you are, what you are, where you are, what's happening. It's all a blur. This is what used to happen when people went for the darshan of Sri Aurobindo and the mother during that period, which includes even this, when Sri Aurobindo reduced himself to be made accessible, bearable by people. And still people would find themselves being so overwhelmed. A gigantic being, gigantic presence, overwhelmingly large, and you've forgotten as if everything, you're pulled into or pushed into a cosmic opening or state. And numerous such experiences we have heard from people, numerous experiences galore. I've shared here one experience which was from someone in the United States. I had gone to the community in Crestone, and someone heard I'm from the Sri Aurobindo ashram. He came straight away and he said, you know what, I had met the mother. And I said, okay, what was it? And he was eager to share. He said he had come to Auroville when Auroville started. He was interested in the Auroville idea and the spiritual community, ecosystem, etc. Not interested so much in the spirituality of the community. And someone told him, you know, you should go and meet Mother. He said, why? Oh, she's the founder of Auroville, right? Yeah, why should I meet her? That old woman, why should I meet her? No, the person said, it's really worth it, you should try. So this man comes, and he came through my teacher, MP Pandit, who was his mother's secretary. He asked for an appointment because he was told it's worth it. He gets an appointment. He goes to the mother, and he's narrating what happened. And as he's narrating, he just started tearing. He said, I went and met her, and I felt this extraordinary love pouring out from her into me, and my love was pouring out into her. And then she bounced me around all over the universe, and I was bouncing around all over the universe. And I don't know what happened. For 3 days, I was just completely blank. I later did an interview with him, but he was not as effusive in the interview and the recording. But after 3 days where he's completely blank, he's been drawn into this extraordinary state, bounced around the universe. So I asked him, please elaborate what that means. It's like I was being thrown around everywhere, from one end of the universe to the other end of the universe, and layers of consciousness were opening in the whole universe. And you get a glimpse of what this is like. She just pulled him into the opening to the cosmic consciousness. And it's a glimpse. It's not even the whole thing. It's just first unfolding layers and layers are beginning, and he's finding himself all over, everywhere, across space and time, bouncing around. Because he's still too finite, struggling to meet this infinity, which is still unfolding layers. 3 days pass, he's come back from the darshan. He doesn't know how he lived, he ate food, he did things, but he is in a state of a blur. At the end of the 3 days, he comes to my teacher, MP Pandit, and he says, after this experience, I can't go back to my normal life. But I can't live in the ashram either. What should I do? Please ask mother, because I don't have a solution. So my teacher took this question to the mother, and he came back from the mother, which is one of the most amazing things. He brought a letter from the mother, where the mother had addressed the letter to the Dalai Lama, introducing this man, and told the man, you must go and serve the Dalai Lama. And he was shocked by that. And of course, then he became the main producer of Dalai Lama's films and made him famous in many ways and so on. But obviously, the mother saw the soul's purpose in this incarnation. She gave him the experience that he was ready for, to awaken to his deeper spiritual potential of some work done in prior lives. But then she put him on the track that the soul had chosen for this life's mission. And so I asked him, well, since then, have you gone back? He said, no. I said, why don't you come? There are these days on which you can visit the mother's room. He hesitated. He said, I'll want to. But he said, I'm afraid. I said, afraid of what? He said, I'm afraid I will be disappointed. I understood very well. And I respect his decision. It has happened to many when they went back later or now, that they did not tune to that consciousness in which they received that experience. And I've even heard from many people, when they went to the darshan, to mother's room today, they looked around and said, but it's such a small room. When I came, it felt like this huge hall. That's the memory, because in the consciousness they were drawn into, it was this inner world, it was this inner ashram, it was in an inner wide consciousness. And now when they come, it is in this reduced small consciousness where they see the physical space and the physical domain. Equally, there are those who still on the inner level are open, they enter the same space and have that experience of something beautiful and extraordinary. So it's not about whether you go into that space, it's about your receptivity and the state in which you approach. And if you are in the correct receptive state, that necessary receptive state, and you approach with the necessary opening, well, she will give you the same experience in the room, or even at the samadhi, or in your own room. For her, it doesn't matter. It's the state of receptivity which will matter. So I respected his choice to not go, but it might still happen, who knows. And I hope he might, if he does, remember the fullness of that experience. So this is an answer to Meenal's question, do the gods and goddesses exist in the forms we see in the pictures? Yes, they do, but it's not the form. The lower down you come, the more the form dominates. The higher up you go, the more the experience of their consciousness dominates rather than the physical appearance of form, which may still be there as an entry point. That's why I gave this example of this man bounced around. That's the nature of the cosmic experience. You're bounced across space and time and layers unfolding of infinity. When you meet that deity, and in this case he met the mother in physical form, that's the experience he had, isn't it? So it's not so much which form you saw them in, whether the hand has 5 fingers, whether he was holding a conch shell and a lotus flower, or whether his skin was... It's not that. It's the quality of consciousness that flowed, and more than anything, the quality you received and how it shifted and opened you to that experience. And it's very easy to have the experience of these gods at the level of the vital domains, and that is beautiful, absolutely overwhelming in itself, but nothing compared to what you would experience in the higher ranges, and particularly the overmental, where the world itself is and the substance is of a cosmic consciousness. V-Truth asks, why does it pain when we realize we missed the darshan of Mother and Sri Aurobindo, the rarest of rare chance of having darshan of divine beings. I would simply say to We Truth and others who feel this, I don't know your age, but simply I ask you, how do you know you were not there? Let that sink in. How do you know you were not already there? Let me give a more detailed example. Someone who was there right now, right then with the mother, at whatever you might choose is the closest, even as an attendant to the mother personally and Sri Aurobindo as Champaklal was, or others who had these experiences of the descent of these overmental gods and so on. Most of them have now left their body. Some of them have reincarnated. When they have reincarnated and then they read these texts and they say, oh, I wish I had been there. You see the problem. And if you tell them you actually were there, you had that darshan, you had that gift, you had that blessing, and you did not do the work to remember today. Can you do the work now so that you will not remember the details? That's not the point. Recover that consciousness, that gift that you received then. Or now make your life worthy of that opportunity. So what I want to say is, do not focus too much on the physical experience of having been there. I would even say, assume you have been with them. A simple thing, if you feel this deep yearning to have been with them, or the sense of deep familiarity with them, it comes because something in your soul recognizes in its recall, in its memory, that immersion it has received, whether in the previous life or in one of the earlier special such incarnations, is irrelevant. You are born today and you feel this because this is the direction of your work. Let this come forward. Assume, tell yourself that you have been with them before. What are you going to make of that now? It's not what you did then that matters, it's what you do today. Let me put it from another way, from the mother's perspective. She has prepared somebody for so many, let's say even for many lives, brought them to her, done this work. Now the person has, let's say, finished the biological maximum the body could provide, moved on, and she has brought them back, or they have come back with the aspiration to again serve her. And this time when they come, they say, oh, I have missed so much, I could not be with you, now what will I do? And they drift off. Do they even make the effort to recover all that was given to them? Do they even make the effort to live by the values that they so miss not being able to directly experience today? So rather, I would put to you this way, if you feel that that would have been worthwhile as an experience or as a standard to live by, start doing this now. Because you will get back that experience, because it is held in your soul's memory, not in your surface physical memory. Recover the soul's influence within you, and the more you grow close to that, the more the memory of that immersion will dawn in you. And that immersion, not as it took place merely in physical terms, that immersion as it takes place today in your intimacy, your soul's intimacy with the mother. And it will be a living darshan today. Tomorrow is the 24th of November. And if you're planning to go to visit the mother's room, Sri Aurobindo's room, tomorrow is Sri Aurobindo's room, or the darshan room. Or you are at home and you're going to sit in concentration for a darshan because it's darshan day. This is your darshan. The meeting the Divine Mother and Sri Aurobindo in immersion in consciousness, in the soul's recognition, in the soul's memory, in the soul's closeness. Give yourself the time and the effort necessary for this immersion. And it will be as vivid, as deep, as valuable as that physical darshan, which today you cannot replicate, but the content of it, free of its form, you can receive in the living presence, in their living presence as it is today. Isn't that more valuable, more precious even? So look rather upon those past lives or moments or memories as pointers to help you regain this living immersion of the darshan today. And that's available wherever you are in the world, isn't it? If for you there is a special vibration you felt in that space of the ashram, in mother's room or Sri Aurobindo's room, use the memory of that to recall and re-enter that deep immersion. But the immersion is with the mother and Sri Aurobindo, or generally with the divine consciousness, with the divine mother, in whatever way it happens to you most naturally. I will just look at a couple of more questions. Anuradha is asking from where I was reading. This is from Mother's, most of them were from Mother's agenda. So I've given the dates. You can look up that date in the Mother's agenda. Or simplest still, just take a few words of what I read and search that phrase exactly, and you'll find the text easily. There are a few other questions I'll keep for next time, but I think just on this last theme, the last question, if we can dwell on this, because this would be the best way to prepare for tomorrow's darshan also. The darshan is not a physical journey like going to a temple. It is a psychological, spiritual immersion. Darshan itself loosely translates as revelation, what is revealed, visioned. There are two aspects to the darshan. You have the vision of the divine, but the other is the divine pours into you. If your eyes were closed, but you were open, his pouring is more important than you seeing, isn't it? So someone had made this very pithy observation in the darshan. It is not important that you saw them, it is important they saw you. Of course, it helps that you saw also. But my point is, do not focus on you seeing. Rather focus on you receiving the presence, the love, the immersion, the peace, the joy, the closeness, the sense of intimacy, the soul's memory drawn forward in immersion. And how would you do that? Do whatever helps to draw out these. And the process can be very simple. You sit quietly, set aside everything else. Feel, remember your love for the mother, for the divine, for Sri Aurobindo. If it helps, read something which helps to deepen that closeness, familiarity, that evokes that memory. Dwell in this. And the moment you feel that presence and the memory and the dwelling has built to some point, let the means fade out and focus rather on the immersion. So you read, so perhaps you felt you chanted something, you did a prayer, you visualized, you looked at an image, or you just remembered what it felt like. All these are entry points. Any and all are valid. It has entry points. The moment some immersion has been built up, let go of the form in which you entered the immersion. Focus now on the immersion itself. Otherwise, the mistake is, to give the analogy, you come to the temple, you open the gate. Oh, now I'm seeing God inside. What do? Because I opened the gate, I saw God. So now I'm keep going to close and open the gate. No, you're supposed to leave behind the gate, go in now. Plunge in, go deep into immersion. Isn't it? That's the intention. So having used that entry point, you feel the presence, dwell in the love, dwell in the joy, dwell in the deep satisfaction that you have in the soul's remembrance, the soul's deep satisfaction, your psychic presence that comes forward or its influence that fills you. And generally, the movement is either from an inward out welling up of that joy and immersion, or sometimes just an upward movement or a descent of that flow that fills you. And let it grow, let it intensify, let yourself now flow in it. Comes the third stage, to the point of self forgetfulness. Where when you feel this love, with this presence, this light, this joy, this blissfulness, whatever form it takes, this deep peace, you enjoy it so much and you as if give yourself to it, to the point where you merge, melt, join in it. You forget yourself. There is only that presence. And this is the soul's deep, intimate immersion, or some part of your consciousness, deep, intimate immersion in the Mother, in Sri Aurobindo, in the divine consciousness. Stay in it, stay in it. When you come out of it, don't fall back into your old little narrow person. When you come out of it, you must be like a part of their consciousness, now separated out, now put out for their work. As their finger, as their hand, as their instrument, as their child, in whatever way you feel. Maintain that relationship. Don't lose that. Don't come out to fall back. Come out to stay on in the relationship. Now turn that relationship into your life meaning. Nikhil asks whether immersion takes place when you enter into Sri Aurobindo's text. Yes, why not? Whatever works for you. I'm giving you many ways, whatever works for you. The immersion is important, whatever works. And it may be different for different people, even for different timings. So, dwell in the memory, deepen into immersion, lose yourself in the immersion. And the fourth step, when you come out of it, retain the continuity. Do not lose them again. Maintain this link now, continue to live your life with this immersion, with this memory. So that in some sense, everything you do is done with awareness of them and even for them. This may not last for a long time. This may not be complete. Do not worry. For as long as you can, enjoy this. Bit by bit, this will then grow. But what I'm showing you is the way by which you can have your darshan of Sri Aurobindo and the Mother and the Divine generally, in whatever form, aspect that you choose. Whenever you choose. Or eventually even living in the constant darshan, vision, revelation, apocalypse of the divinity, of the divine in you, around you, everywhere. But this would be the direction that would be worthwhile. And if you choose to also have a physical part to this process, going to a place, going to a center, going to the Mother's, Sri Aurobindo's room or otherwise, make the physical part of it an aid to your psychological turn of attention, exclusivity of focus, and depth of immersion. Then it would be useful. So let's take a moment to review. 24th of November is the anniversary of a very exceptional cosmic event that took place in Sri Aurobindo's body as part of Sri Aurobindo's larger work, which he then used as the occasion to found his work on earth in a more institutional, organized framework, where he took on disciples to help them grow in the practice of the integral yoga. And if you today, wherever you are on earth, consider yourself a disciple of Sri Aurobindo, not merely a devotee, a disciple is one who also follows a discipline, then know that he takes charge of your sadhana to the extent that you give yourself, and she takes charge of the sadhana. But put yourself in the effort, the necessary discipline of the sadhana. And the darshan was one of those special occasions then, subsequently every year, when as disciples we went to meet Sri Aurobindo and the Mother, they gazed at us and blessed us. In passing, there was an incident someone had narrated. In those days, the names of this and the sequence were very strict. Each person's name was there with a number. You went when your number was called. The mother knew beforehand, they had the list. They would look at who's going to come next. They would prepare the force. When the person came, they would infuse what was needed for that person. So there was one person who was sick with some major illness. I think it was cancer of some kind. He did not turn up. Instead, the next person came, and the mother had not been informed that he had not come. And when this next person came, this was one of the attendants of the mother who saw from the mother's consciousness a ball of light thrown out and infusing into that person. And then she realized it was not the person. This is just to tell you how much attention they put in infusing what was needed for each sadhaka for the sadhana. Nothing has changed, it is still the same. The difference is only of our receptivity. Their presence is equally the same. So when you go to them, when you approach in this way, in your home, in some center, in the physical space of the ashram, Sri Aurobindo's room, wherever, it does not matter. You meet them. They will infuse into you what is needed. But you go with an exclusive and entire focus. Let all else be pushed out so that you can be in that focus. And then you will be able to receive. As they used to go then, with this full focus. If you were told just now, you have an appointment with your mother tomorrow at 4 p.m., do you think you're going to sleep tonight? You're going to be thinking, 4 p.m., I must prepare. I'll take a shower with a very special perfume and put on my best clothes, and I'll be thinking, what am I going to say? What am I going to do? Entire thinking will be preparing for that one meeting. And so by the time it's 4 p.m., your entire consciousness is one pointed in focus. You meet her, you are able to receive because you're fully one pointed in receptivity. What happens today? Oh, it's time for me. Let me set aside my phone, my social media. I went to the room, I did a prayer, I felt nice, came back to my social media. I just did a ritual. Useful. Everything is useful. But not that opportunity. And then you say, oh, but they are not in the body, so it's not the same. Wrong. It's exactly the same. You are not the same. Make this correction. Take the day as your darshan day. Prepare for the darshan. Go, even if it's in your own home. Go to the photograph of Sri Aurobindo and the mother. Sit before them in full preparation of receptivity. And you will receive. And the advantage of the event, cosmic event, of 24th November is that, well, there's a resonance, a rhythm of repetition, something special, and it's the reason Sri Aurobindo and the mother accepted the darshans even though there was dilution, because it was an occasion to connect and infuse more materially something of their presence. So this is all I have to share regarding the darshan of 24th November and the nature of Sri Aurobindo's own sadhana and what actually he had achieved, what actually was done in terms of the overmental and the supramental and the transformation itself. If you have had any prior wrong ideas, consciously erase them, but also make sure others do not have these wrong ideas, because there is an intent out there by the forces hostile to the work of the evolution and the growth of the supramental consciousness in humanity to spread wrong statements. Do not allow yourself to be confused by the falsehood. Let's take a moment to concentrate, all of us, in gratitude to Sri Aurobindo and the mother, in appreciation for the enormous work that they have done, and perhaps most importantly, in some understanding of what that work really entailed, how difficult it was, but because of which everything for us has been made so much easier. When Sri Aurobindo left his body, the mother wrote this message, and it's worth rereading as a prayer to Sri Aurobindo. To thee who hast been the material envelope of our master, to the body of Sri Aurobindo, but also to Sri Aurobindo now. To thee our infinite gratitude, before thee who hast done so much for us, who hast worked, struggled, suffered, hoped, endured so much. Before thee who hast willed all, attempted all, prepared, achieved all for us. Before thee we bow down and implore that we may never forget, even for a moment, all we owe to thee.